Okay, so what we're going to be looking at now is that we're going to be looking how to solve quadratic equations if we're not able to do it uh, using our factoring. So, where you multiply the first by the last and see if you can break it down in some way. Most of the time, that's not going to be able to do it. And you'll have some weird numbers that are floating around. And so we're going to go through two methods to try to solve this. The first one is called the completing the square, and the second one, which will be in the next video, is about the quadratic formula. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do something called completing the square. Now this right here is basically the formula for completing the square. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get like x plus something, that whole thing squared is equal to a number, because then we can easily solve it the rest of the way through. And so we're looking at the first one, and we want to see, can we change this into something that looks something like that? And so we'll take the b, 6 divided by 2, and then square it. That gets us 9, which that's what it is for the bottom, so yes, we can. So it would be x plus 3, or 6 over 2, and square it. So this one is possible. Now let's look at the next one. It'd be 10 over 2, which is 5. Squared 5 is 25. That is not 100, so we're not able to change it right away. But we will be able to once we set it equal to something. But right now we're not able. Alright, so now let's say we want to solve these. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, okay, this is what we saw previously from the last slide. And we can change that to x plus 3 squared, and that equals 1. To get rid of the squared, we square root both sides, getting us x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus 1, which now we've got two equations. We've got x plus 3 equals a positive 1, and x plus 3 is equal to a negative 1. Now when we solve, we get x minus 4, and we get x equals minus 2. And those would be our answers. So our answers would be negative 2 and negative 4. So both of those will be, you'll be able to plug in for x and you get 1. Okay. So now let's look at the next one. If we take negative 2 divided by 2, we get 1 or negative 1, and then we square it, gets us 1. That's what that number is. So we would have x minus 1 squared is equal to 4. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 2. And then you would have your two equations. You would have x minus 1 equals 2 and x minus 1 equals a negative 2. X equals 3, x equals a negative 1. So your two answers would be negative 1 and 3. And those are what x equals. Okay. Alright, so again, those are if you can solve using completing the square. Okay. Alright, so now let's look at this one. So if we do the same thing here, as you see, the negative 4 is not going to work. If we go 4 over 2, that gets us 2 squared, but it's a positive. So that doesn't work. So what we're going to do is we're going to move that 4 to the other side. So that gets us x squared plus 4x equals 0, or equals positive 4. Equals positive 4. And now we're going to add something to both sides. So as you see here, this got us a positive 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, or positive 4. We're going to add 4 to both sides. We can add 4 to both sides because it's just the addition property. It's like when you move something to the other side, you're subtracting the same thing on both sides. This time we're just adding. Now this right here is perfect squared. Okay. Basically what we've done is that we went b over 2 squared and found what that was. And so this will get us x plus 2 squared is equal to 8. And now we just solve it like we've done previously. Square root both sides. X plus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 8. Okay? Or a better way of writing this would be 2 root 2. Okay, simplified. And then we would subtract 2. So our answer would be x equals a negative 2 plus or minus 2 root 2. and that would be our answer. And then you could estimate if they want it. So you'd move the 4 to the other side. Okay, use completing the square, which you take the b value, or the middle one, divide it in half, okay, and then square it. And then that is what you are adding to both sides. Okay, so you will be adding that to both sides, the b over 2 squared, whatever you get for that. And then you solve it the rest of the way through. And that's, as you see, that's what we have. Okay, so now let's look at this one. We're going to move the 1 to the other side, getting us x squared minus 2x equals 1. We're going to go negative 2 over 2 squared, which is your b over 2 squared, which gets us a 1. So now we are going to add 1 to both sides. Okay, add 1 to both sides. And so that gets us a 2 equals, and then it would be an x minus 1 squared. Square root, getting us an x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus root 2. Add 1 to both sides, getting us x is equal to 1 plus or minus root 2. And there's our answer. Okay. So this is the completing of the square and just solving it through. So now let's look at this one. Okay, so we're going to move 34 to the other side, getting us a x squared, or let's see what we have to add to both sides. So it'd be 6 over 2 squared, which is 9. So we're going to go x squared plus 6x equals a negative 34, but we're going to be adding plus 9 plus 9. So we're adding 9 to both. That gets us an x plus 3 squared is equal to a negative 25. Okay. And now we take the square root, and look at that, square root of a negative, which from the previous one we found out was an imaginary number. Square root of 25 is 5, so it'd be 5i. So you have x plus 3 is equal to 5i. Subtract 3. Subtract 3 on both sides, getting us x is equal to negative 3. This would be plus or minus. You still have your plus and minus whenever you take the square root. Plus or minus 5i. Okay. And so if you were to plug these numbers into either those numbers, negative 3 plus 5i or negative 3 minus 5i, into the x, you would get 0. Okay. So now let's look at this one. Since we have a 2 out front, we've got to divide everything by 2. Okay? We've got to have nothing in front of the x squared. So that gets us an x squared plus 1/2 x equals 3. Now we're going to do the same thing. 1/2 over 2 is 1/4. 1/4 squared is 1/16. Okay? So that means we're going to be adding a 1/16. So we go x squared plus 1/2 x plus 1/16 equals 3 plus 1/16. Right. And now we group it, which gets us an x plus 1/4, which as you see was right here before we squared it. And that equals 3 and 1/16. Okay. And now we take the square root, okay, which gets us x plus 1/4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3 and 1/16. Subtract 1/4, subtract 1/4, getting us x is equal to 1/4 plus or minus the square root of 3 and 1/16. And then from there you can try to simplify it to see what you get it down all the way to. Okay, and as you see, it actually simplifies down to something pretty nice. All right, here's your IRAT. So use completing the square for these three and solve for the x on them. Okay, and some of them you might not have to use completing the square, but I would recommend to at least attempt it on some of them. Attempt the completing the square method.